There is a part of you, hidden away, that you may not like to look at, a part of yourself that feels uncomfortable, sometimes even terrifying to acknowledge. We all have it, whether we admit it or not. The shadow, as Carl Jung called it. Yet this shadow side of us holds incredible power, far more than most of us realize. What if within that darkness lies the key to understanding your life's true purpose? What if the very things we try to ignore about ourselves are the ones that will light our path forward? The dark side of humanity. Jung, a pioneering psychologist, believed that every human carries a shadow, those aspects of ourselves we hide or deny because they don't fit with our ideal self-image. Often, society teaches us from a young age to suppress these traits. We're taught that anger is bad, that fear shows weakness, and that envy is something to be ashamed of. But these emotions and impulses, the ones we push into the recesses of our subconscious, do not disappear. They fester, they grow stronger, and in some cases they take over in ways we cannot control. But rather than being something to fear, Jung believed this shadow was something to embrace. In fact, integrating the shadow, he said, is essential to living a whole, authentic life. Imagine for a moment that the very darkness you avoid holds a mirror to your deepest desires, fears, and needs. It doesn't just reveal the raw truth of who you are, it guides you toward what you are meant to become. Spiritual traditions echo this idea. In the myth of the phoenix, the bird must first burn before it can rise anew. The journey into darkness is often a necessary part of transformation. As uncomfortable as it may be to confront, it is the gateway to living a life of deeper meaning. By turning toward the parts of ourselves we fear the most, we can begin to uncover the gifts they hold and the purpose they reveal. Most of us spend a significant amount of time and energy trying to avoid the parts of ourselves we don't like. We hide behind carefully constructed images, trying to be what we think we should be, what others expect of us. The trouble is, when we push down aspects of our true selves, we also push down our potential. We limit our growth. As Jung famously said, one does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. This means that true self-discovery doesn't come from ignoring the uncomfortable parts of our psyche, but by integrating them. In other words, we need to bring our shadow into the light. You might wonder, what exactly is the shadow? How do I find it? The shadow is everything you've repressed or disowned about yourself. It's not just your anger or sadness, but your ambitions, your deepest desires, and even your hidden talents. It can be traced in the moments when you feel an emotional charge, when someone irritates you, or when you feel jealousy flare up. Those reactions are often signals pointing to your shadow. Think of the parable of the prodigal son, a story that has resonated for centuries in Christian and spiritual traditions alike. In this story, the younger son takes his inheritance and leaves home, squandering everything in wild living. When he returns, ashamed and broken, he is welcomed back with open arms by his father, who celebrates his return. Spiritually, this story is often interpreted as a reminder that we are never too lost or too broken to come home, to reconnect with our higher selves. But there's a deeper, more psychological reading too. The prodigal son's journey into darkness, his mistakes and reckless living, were necessary for him to understand who he truly was. His shadow, the part of him that was wild and impulsive, led him on a path that ultimately brought him home with greater wisdom. In much the same way, your shadow is the part of you that, if explored, can bring you back to a deeper understanding of yourself and your life's purpose. The aspects of yourself you've denied may be precisely the ones that hold the most power. Let's say you've always repressed your ambition, fearing it might make you seem too aggressive. Yet that very ambition could be the key to unlocking your potential and living the life you've always dreamed of. It can be tempting to blame others for our problems or project our discomfort outward. But Jung reminds us that everything we find outside of ourselves is, in some way, a reflection of what is going on within. When we don't deal with our shadow, it shows up in the people and situations around us. Have you ever noticed that the traits you dislike most in others are often the ones you secretly struggle with yourself? The person who angers you because they're always so selfish may be mirroring the part of you that craves more attention or self-care. The shadow isn't something to be feared or shunned. Instead, it is an invaluable guide. This idea isn't unique to Jungian psychology. The notion that our darker nature holds wisdom is present in various spiritual traditions. In alchemy, the process of turning base metals into gold is a metaphor for turning our base instincts into spiritual enlightenment. In Buddhism, suffering is seen as a doorway to awakening. The shadow, like the darkness before dawn, is a necessary part of the spiritual process. So, how do we begin to engage with our shadow in a meaningful way? How to engage with our shadow. The journey into the shadow is not unlike the mythical hero's journey described by Joseph Campbell. The hero starts out in the ordinary world but is soon called to adventure, to face trials and to confront their deepest fears. Often there is a moment when the hero must descend into the underworld, whether it's the belly of a whale, a deep cave, or a terrifying labyrinth. This descent symbolizes the confrontation with the shadow, the part of the self that has been hidden or feared. Only by facing this inner darkness can the hero emerge transformed, with a new sense of self and a deeper understanding of their purpose. In your life, the shadow might show up in subtle ways: a sudden burst of anger, an unexplainable feeling of anxiety, or the constant judgment of others. These are clues. They point to the parts of yourself that you haven't fully integrated, the parts that are begging for attention. But instead of running from these feelings, what if you welcomed them? What if, instead of reacting with shame or fear, you asked yourself, "What is this trying to teach me?" Jung believed that within each of us there is a tension between the ego, the conscious self, the identity we show to the world, and the shadow, the unconscious self that we hide. This tension creates a kind of inner conflict, and if left unresolved, it can manifest in destructive ways. For example, have you ever noticed how people who strive to be the most moral or virtuous often have the darkest secrets? The more we try to deny the shadow, the more it controls us, often in ways we are not even aware of. To bring the shadow into consciousness, we must first acknowledge that it exists. This is where many people get stuck. It's uncomfortable to admit that we have a dark side, that we are capable of anger, jealousy, greed, or even cruelty. But Jung assures us that these feelings are part of being human. To deny them is to deny our wholeness. He said, "I'd rather be whole than good." This means embracing the totality of who we are, both the light and the dark. In spiritual traditions, this concept of embracing duality is central to understanding the self. In Taoism, the yin and yang symbol represents the balance of opposites: light and dark, masculine and feminine, positive and negative. One cannot exist without the other. Similarly, in Hindu philosophy, the god Shiva is often depicted as both the creator and the destroyer, embodying the cycle of life, death, and rebirth. These traditions remind us that to be truly whole, we must accept all parts of ourselves, even the ones that seem contradictory or uncomfortable. So, how do we begin this process of integrating the shadow? The first step is awareness. Pay attention to the emotions that rise up unexpectedly. These emotions are your guides. Let's say, for example, that you feel a surge of envy when a friend achieves something you've been striving for. Rather than pushing that feeling away, examine it. What is it telling you about your own desires? Perhaps the envy reveals a deep longing you've been denying, a dream that you've been too afraid to pursue. By listening to the message behind the emotion, you can begin to understand what your shadow is trying to show you. Next, it's important to practice self-compassion. The process of shadow work is not about judgment or self-criticism, it's about acceptance. When you encounter parts of yourself that you don't like, approach them with curiosity, not condemnation. For example, if you realize that you have a tendency toward anger, instead of berating yourself for it, Ask yourself where that anger comes from. What unmet needs or unresolved pain might be fueling it? By treating your shadow with kindness, you create space for healing and transformation. Jung also emphasized the importance of creativity in shadow work. Our unconscious mind speaks to us in symbols, images, and metaphors, often through dreams. Keeping a dream journal is one way to tap into the messages of your unconscious. Pay attention to recurring themes, symbols, or characters in your dreams. These often represent aspects of your shadow, giving you insight into the parts of yourself that are seeking integration. Art, writing, and other creative forms of expression can also help you connect with your shadow. The act of creation allows the unconscious mind to flow freely, bypassing the defenses of the ego. You may find that through painting, writing poetry, or even dancing, you begin to access emotions and insights that you weren't consciously aware of. This is the power of creativity. It bridges the gap between the conscious and unconscious, allowing the shadow to come into the light. The process of shadow integration is not linear. It's self-discovery that requires patience and persistence. There will be moments of clarity followed by moments of confusion, times when you feel empowered and times when you feel overwhelmed. This is all part of the journey. The goal is not to eliminate the shadow, but to bring it into balance with the rest of your being. We often associate the shadow with negativity, with all the things we dislike about ourselves or want to disown. However, Carl Jung saw the shadow as something much more complex and dynamic. In fact, he believed that within the shadow lies not just our repressed emotions and fears, but also the dormant aspects of our true power, creativity, and individuality. The task of integrating the shadow, then, is not about merely confronting our flaws, it's about uncovering the fullness of who we really are. When you engage in shadow work, you're not just learning to accept your dark side, you're also reclaiming parts of yourself that have been buried. These are the parts of you that, due to societal conditioning, upbringing, or personal trauma, were deemed unacceptable and pushed into the unconscious. But in repressing these aspects, we don't just lose our negative traits, we also lose parts of ourselves that could be the key to living a more authentic and purposeful life. So how do we reclaim these pieces of our soul and, in doing so, reveal our life's purpose? The human persona, masks. One of the most profound ways to start this process is to challenge the masks we wear in everyday life. These masks represent the ego, the image of ourselves that we project to the world. Often we cling to these masks because they give us a sense of control or security. Maybe you've been wearing the mask of the people pleaser, always trying to make others happy, afraid of rejection or criticism. Or perhaps you wear the mask of the overachiever, constantly striving for success and recognition, but feeling a deep sense of inadequacy underneath. These masks are part of what Jung called the persona, the version of ourselves we show to the world. But the persona is incomplete. It is often built to shield us from the uncomfortable truths that the shadow holds. When we identify too strongly with our persona, we can become disconnected from the deeper, more authentic parts of ourselves. Jung believed that this disconnection could lead to a kind of spiritual stagnation, where we feel lost, directionless, or even empty, despite external success. To break free from the hold of the persona, we must be willing to let go of the illusion of who we think we are. This requires a radical kind of honesty, a willingness to look at the parts of ourselves we've been avoiding, not just in the negative sense, but in the positive sense as well. For example, what if you've always felt a deep desire to express yourself creatively, but due to early criticism or fear of failure, you've pushed that desire away? What if, by hiding this part of yourself, you've also hidden your greatest source of joy and purpose? This is where shadow work becomes truly transformative. By peeling back the layers of the persona and embracing the shadow, we open ourselves up to the fullness of our being. Jung often spoke about the concept of individuation, which is the process of becoming whole, of integrating all parts of the self, both light and dark, conscious and unconscious. Individuation is not about perfection, it's about authenticity. It's about living a life that is aligned with who we truly are, not who we think we're supposed to be. But how do we begin this work in a practical way? One of the most powerful tools in shadow work is reflection on your relationships. Our interactions with others are often mirrors of our inner world. The things we admire in others often reflect the qualities we wish we could embody, while the things that irritate or anger us often point to parts of ourselves that we've disowned. If you find yourself constantly frustrated with a friend's arrogance, for instance, it could be that you are rejecting your own desire to be confident or assertive. Conversely, if you idolize someone for their creativity, it might indicate that you've suppressed your own creative potential. Jung called this process projection, where we project our unconscious thoughts, feelings, and desires onto others. By becoming aware of our projections, we can start to reclaim those parts of ourselves. The next time you feel a strong emotional reaction towards someone, ask yourself, what is this reaction telling me about myself? What part of me is being triggered? This is the first step toward bringing the shadow into the light. Another important aspect of shadow work is the practice of self-forgiveness. Often, when we start to uncover our shadow, we are confronted with parts of ourselves that we don't like. Maybe we realize we have been holding on to resentment, jealousy, or anger. It can be tempting to judge ourselves harshly for these feelings, to fall into the trap of self-criticism. But shadow work is not about punishment or shame. It's about compassion. The act of forgiveness is seen as a pathway to healing. In Buddhism, for example, it is taught that holding on to anger or hatred only perpetuates suffering for both ourselves and others. Similarly, in Christian teachings, forgiveness is often emphasized as a way to release ourselves from the bondage of past hurts. Whether you approach this through a spiritual lens or a psychological one, the message is the same. To integrate the shadow, we must first be willing to forgive ourselves for being imperfect. Self-forgiveness allows us to accept that we are human, that we have both light and dark within us, and that this duality is not something to be ashamed of, but something to embrace. When we forgive ourselves, we create space for growth. We no longer waste energy on hiding or denying parts of ourselves. Instead, we can use that energy to live more fully and authentically. As you engage in this process of self-reflection and forgiveness, you may start to notice subtle shifts in your life. You might feel more grounded, more connected to your true desires, and more confident in expressing yourself. This is the beginning of living from your true purpose. As Jung so eloquently put it, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. The self. Integrating the shadow, the hidden parts of ourselves, reshapes not only our sense of identity, but also the reality we experience. This is the great secret of shadow work. When we reclaim the aspects of ourselves that we've denied or buried, we begin to live in alignment with our authentic self, and that authenticity changes everything. Jung believed that integrating the shadow was not just a psychological task, but a spiritual one. He often spoke of the self as the totality of who we are, a concept that transcends the ego and includes both our conscious and unconscious selves. The self is the source of our deepest wisdom and purpose, and when we connect to it, we are guided toward the life we are meant to live. This is not a life dictated by fear, social expectations, or unresolved wounds, but one that reflects our soul's unique path. To fully understand this transformation, let's turn to a common archetype that appears in many spiritual traditions, the wounded healer. In Greek mythology, there is the story of Chiron, the wise centaur who was accidentally wounded and could not heal himself. However, through his suffering, Chiron became a great healer for others. This archetype, which Jung often referred to in his work, represents the idea that our greatest gifts often arise from our deepest wounds. It is only through facing and integrating the pain in our shadow that we can step into our true purpose and serve others. In a modern context, we see this same archetype at play in the lives of many individuals who have experienced profound personal challenges only to transform those experiences into something meaningful. Think of someone who has gone through addiction, trauma, or illness and later dedicates their life to helping others navigate similar struggles. What they have done is embrace their shadow, heal it, and in doing so, found their calling. The parts of themselves that once caused them suffering have become their greatest sources of strength. This is the power of shadow integration. It allows us to transform our pain into purpose. When we stop running from our shadow and instead choose to face it with compassion, we unlock a well of potential within us. This potential can take many forms: creative expression, leadership, teaching, healing, or simply living with more authenticity and joy. The key is that we no longer feel disconnected from ourselves or our lives. We stop feeling like we're playing a role and start living from our core. This brings us to the concept of synchronicity, another key idea in Jung's work. Jung described synchronicity as meaningful coincidences, events that seem unrelated yet are deeply connected on a spiritual or psychological level. When we begin to align with our true selves, we often notice an increase in these synchronistic events. It's as if the universe responds to our inner transformation by guiding us toward the people, opportunities, and experiences that are meant for us. Have you ever had a moment where you were thinking about a new direction in life, only for a book, conversation, or random encounter to offer exactly the guidance you needed? These moments are not mere chance. According to Jung, they are signs that we are in tune with our deeper purpose and that purpose is calling us forward. By integrating our shadow, we become more receptive to these signs. We become more attuned to the flow of life and more willing to trust the path that unfolds before us. But shadow work is not a one-time event. It is an ongoing process, a lifelong journey of self-discovery. Each time we encounter a challenge or setback, we are given the opportunity to dive deeper into our unconscious and uncover more of our hidden potential. Jung often warned against the idea of spiritual bypassing, a term that refers to the tendency to use spirituality as a way to avoid dealing with the real issues in our lives. True shadow work requires that we confront the uncomfortable parts of ourselves again and again, knowing that each encounter will bring us closer to wholeness. One of the most powerful practices to keep this process alive is by cultivating awareness of our thoughts, emotions, and reactions in daily life. This can help us catch glimpses of our shadow in action. For example, the next time you feel a surge of anger, insecurity, or envy, instead of pushing the feeling away, pause and ask yourself, what is this really about? What part of me is being triggered? This simple act of curiosity can lead to profound insights about your shadow and the beliefs that are holding you back. By learning to embrace it, we are not diminishing our light, we are expanding it. We are becoming more whole, more authentic, and more aligned with the purpose that is uniquely ours. Carl Jung's teachings remind us that the journey to self-discovery is not about reaching some final destination of perfection. It is about embracing the fullness of our humanity, the light, the dark, and everything in between. When we do this, we unlock the door to a life that is not only more fulfilling, but also more impactful. We begin to live in alignment with our true purpose, and in doing so, we contribute to the healing of the world. The shadow, once feared and misunderstood, becomes our greatest ally on this journey. It holds the key to our deepest wisdom, creativity, and power. By embracing it, we not only reveal our life's purpose, but we also find the courage to live that purpose fully, unapologetically, and with a sense of joy and freedom. The shadow is the doorway to your true self, and through that door lies a life of purpose, meaning, and infinite possibility. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, feel free to subscribe to the channel. Thanks for watching.